Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I have a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And today we are joined by Dr. Bruce Hutchinson.
Glad to be here once again.
Yeah.
What number is this? This must be like 6 or 7, right? Like of reviews we've done.
I don't know. Yeah, you guys have to do a count.
You got 3 Batman.
I want to be your top guest in terms of number of appearances. So if I'm not,
I think you already are. I think you
we need to do more.
I think Travis is.
Yeah, you might.
Yeah.
Well,
Travis is fighting.
Here's the issue: we did 3 Batman episodes, but we only released 2.
No, we did 4 episodes.
And I bet you if you just add up the number of minutes of content I've been on the most, because ours are always really long.
That's true.
For good or for bad.
You 100% win that one for sure.
Yeah.
Well, of course, since you're on the channel, Bruce, we are talking about another movie today, and today we're talking about Joel and Ethan Cohen's Raising Arizona.
Well, technically, only one of them directed it, so
yeah.
Cohen,
one's credited. But if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, that notification bell. That way, up to all future episodes of Podcast 2 for 1, as well as all the cool content we have at 2 for 1 Studios. And of course, if you didn't know, we're sponsored by Kapow Comics, located on 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas. They have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and special guest appearances throughout the year. So check those guys out if you haven't already. Anyway, guys, we're talking Raising Arizona. Bruce, this was your suggestion, and actually, I had never seen the movie before this week.
Yeah. And so, I don't think we had done a comedy yet. And so it just seemed like doing a comedy would be a good idea. And so then as soon as, comedy came to mind, I know that for whatever reason, like a lot of people haven't seen Raising Arizona, and it's one of my all-time favorite comedies. And so it just seemed like a good choice.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, like weird, like before the Coen brothers were like, I guess, a big deal, kind of a part of their career. And obviously it's one of Nick Cage's early movies. And it's almost that one where like, I remember like, oh yeah, Raising Arizona. And then like later I like found out that was a Coen movie, and I was like, oh, okay. Just kind of, it's just kind of always been under the radar. People have mentioned it. I know you've mentioned a lot. I feel like we've either watched some clips or like looked at some framings probably in class from the film. So yeah, that was good. It was good to finally notch that one off the shame list of movies that probably should.
Well, so I'm curious, what did you guys think?
Yeah, me and Daniel actually messaged each other a little bit earlier today, because he was like, what'd you think about the movie? And I think we both kind of had a similar reaction, and Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong. But I feel like ultimately, like I did enjoy it. I thought it was super entertaining, and it was wild, and it was just so like, what the fuck is going? Like I literally thought, like, what the fuck is Bruce making me watch right now? And but I did laugh at parts of it. I'm just not 100% sure it's something for me anyway that I'm going to revisit a whole bunch. But I did really enjoy it though. I thought it was so weird and wild.
Yeah, I think it caught me off guard. I think the absurdity of the world was like, oh, this is, I just like, it was like, and it wasn't even until probably like 30 minutes in that I was like, I have to like readjust what expectations I have for the world they're in, because it's not the real world.
Right.
And I think this may be blasphemous, but at times it almost, that part of it reminded me of like Napoleon Dynamite in a way, or that Napoleon Dynamite may have pulled some from this movie even.
Yeah.
And kind of its interpretation of this world with just hyperly characterized, act like characters where they're just like hyper versions of whatever they're portraying. But I think I was a little bit like Donovan. I'm just kind of like, I can't figure out what to expect next. You know what I mean? When I'm just like,
Yeah.
Like usually even with movies, it's like, okay, well, I bet I know where this is going. And like obviously when they're with the baby and like the other comments break out, I'm like, okay, I can kind of, obviously that's going to be a thing. But like it kept going where I was just like, what? What? They're swingers? What? He's robbing for the, it's just like this kind of like, I didn't see that coming, and I didn't see that coming, and I enjoyed it. I think it was fun. It was not.
Yeah.
I think I was expecting to be like laughing a lot, and it was kind of more of this is like kind of taken aback in a humorous way by the absurdity or by the repeated lines, which is a Coen Brothers thing, of course. Like then, like or
Right.
okay then, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That they kept repeating. But yeah, I liked it. It was not what I expected.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a singular movie, and just a couple of thoughts, before we sort of get into it. In terms of it being a comedy, I do think that there are laugh out loud moments, but I think a lot of the comedy, like you guys said, it's almost like an action comedy, and so there's a lot of the humor is in framings and compositions and in the mise en scène and even in the editing, and so it's a very clever movie, and a lot of the humor is visual, right? And it's sort of the narrative and the over the top acting with this very distinct narrative style. And I want to ask you, kind of along those lines, is there a contemporary filmmaker who makes action comedies who maybe came to your mind?
It's so weird you said that, because I watched this movie like for no reason at all. Before I watched Raising Arizona this week, I watched Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
I posted about that, yeah.
And I was sitting there, and I was like, and after we're sitting here talking, I'm like, boy, this is like Edgar Wright, but like in the 80s.
Yeah, and if you Google Edgar Wright Raising Arizona, you will find out that Raising Arizona is Edgar Wright's all-time favorite movie.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Makes a lot.
So you can draw a direct line, I think, from Raising Arizona to the kind of movies that Edgar Wright's making now.
What are the odds that I watched them back to back within 24 hours? That is so wild. And and I watched Scott Pilgrim first, actually. So that's what a coincidence. But anyway, no, that's 100% right. It's even like the way the camera still, things enter the frame. And then I kept thinking a lot when I was watching it, like the camera is so fluid in terms of just like tracking people, and just like we don't really care about perfect composition. We're just kind of fucking going.
No, I remember that like in the baby stealing scene, it's like these babies are crawling, and it's like we're getting these like chase scene moves with a crane following the babies like crawling around and stuff. Yeah, no, the camera was very active. I agree. A lot of the humor just came from like the framings. I loved, there was that one framing with him like laying in bed, like in his like cell, and there's that black prisoner on top, and they're like mirror images, and the guy's just kind of rambling on about something. Right. Actually, reading the script, I was like, oh, that's what he was saying, because in the movie I was like, I can't tell, and then the voiceover comes in.
When we couldn't eat crawdads, we ate sand.
Yeah. But I think my favorite characters though had to have been Gail and Evel. Yeah, Evel. And honestly, like once they became like kind of sinners, like because they were just kind of background for a while, or just there for a couple scenes, but then like once they steal the baby and like they kind of take center stage for a good 20, they were honestly hilarious. Like they may have been like my favorite part of the film was their back and forth, the bank robbery, the robbing the store clerk and making him count to 825, like that stuff. And that honestly felt a little more even modern than maybe some of the rest of it. But yeah, no, it was really fun.
Yeah, one of the things besides what we've talked about, the comedy and then the visual comedy, which I think match so well together. The other thing that I've always really loved about Raising Arizona is it's such a sentimental movie. And Sentimental can be good or bad depending on how it's pulled off. But when you think about the Coens, they're like some of the least sentimental filmmakers. When you watch their movies, I mean, you have all these sort of dark endings and bad things happening to people, and this has a dark edge to it, but it does also have this very kind of innocent feel, even though you've got High being this petty criminal and all this stuff. You have this like very old-fashioned love story between these two characters that is sort of updated. And they talk about getting divorced at one point and all this stuff, but it is sort of this love story. And then we'll talk about the ending, but I think the ending is just brilliant in the way that it sets up the possibility of this super sentimental ending, but it's all just his imagination, right? So he's like, I imagine this future where maybe this happens, and then we see that unfold and we feel all good about it, but there's no reason to think that that's what'll really happen. But the Coens end us on that note, right? And so I think it's very clever, and it's a very heartfelt movie, which I think is, it's not something I would normally use to describe a Coen brothers movie. And so there's just this wonderful combination of things, I think, that are really unique to Raising Arizona.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great way to put it. The sentiment is high, and I want to talk about the ending because it caught me by surprise, like most of the movie. But I think it's like the whole film kind of takes this kind of simplistic view of life and applies it kind of everywhere, and just invites you just to kind of engage with the movie at that kind of simplistic level. Like, kind of like, just the bad guy is just this, I felt, in fact, now that I've watched this is going to be a deep cut to some people and a complete, like, what the fuck is this guy even know film? SpongeBob SquarePants, the movie. They're like being chased by this biker dude that I am now 100% convinced was 110% inspired by Smalls, Lenny Smalls. Yeah. Like, it's now that like even like this, they cut to like like arm tattoos, just like this film does multiple times. Like, and like he's bounty hunting them, and like it's like this was a total Lenny Smalls complete homage in that movie that now I understand. But it's just, it does. It's like from the people that work in the prison to the prisoners to the store clerks to the everywhere. It's just kind of like simple. It's kind of this simple take where it's just, you can take things on face value where in other movies you might can't, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's wild. Let's get into it though. I mean, let's get into the movie. Okay, so one thing I really liked about it, and actually I almost kind of missed once we left it, was his narration in the beginning. This little, this big long montage, and I love stuff like that. I'm just a sucker for montage with narration, and it lasts all the way until the 11-minute mark when we get the title. Finally, the
title,
yeah. What happens in that 11 minutes? There's a lot that
a lot happens, and it's so weird seeing. I mean, I remember seeing Nicolas Cage in like the background at Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and he still looks kind of like Nicolas Cage there, but younger. But here, it's like they just like completely changed it. Maybe they didn't change his look. Maybe he just got better looking with Hollywood as he went to Con Air and went to National Treasure and all these other bigger movies. And but it was just so wild seeing him in this role, just completely zany. I mean, I know he's zany, but like, just the opposite of how I picture Nicolas Cage normally. But yeah, let's talk about the opening sequence here.
That first. Go ahead, Daniel.
I said go ahead first, though.
I was just gonna say, like you said, that first 11 minutes just packs in so much, with High's narration, and there's so much going on with that. I mean, it is an incredibly packed, like you guys were saying, 11 minutes. We've got the constant arrests of High, and I mean, he meets Ed 3 times. He proposes to her. I mean, all of this is happening. He's going before the parole board. We're getting all that kind of stuff. He's working at the factory, and we get all of that stuff.
Salad life.
Exactly. And there's just so much great stuff, at the beginning, whether it's the repetition of the stuff with Ed. I should have looked up the actor, and I'm blanking on his name, but he's the guy who is in Blade Runner and stuff, and he's the guy at the factory. He's always standing. I feel so dumb for forgetting his name. Stuff.
Yeah,
and he's like, I'm talking about Dave Paca, and he's like chewing his gum, and we see him twice, and like he's like an unforgettable character,
Yeah.
So
What's
yeah,
one thing you guys were talking about earlier is that, you said, Daniel, all these characters you mentioned a minute ago earlier, that like one thing I love is that, like you said, Bruce, one line of dialogue and there's so much personality and so many quirks to each kind of character, and they all stand, like I can see fans of this, like a cult following, like making movie posters for each one of these one dialogue characters,
right?
And I'm sure they have. And no, it's just there's a lot packed in there. I mean, one thing I love is seeing, Ed, Holly Hunter, is seeing her progression of like, looking at Nicolas Cage or looking at High, and then even when she's like bawling, because she had a bad, I love all that. I think it's great. I love repetition in threes, and I just, it's something about that makes you feel good, and seeing the small incremental changes, and that's great.
Yeah, and it's a great example of voiceover done right, in terms of the voiceover is giving us a lot of information, but at the same time, it's not repeating what we're seeing on the screen. And so we're getting a lot of visual information. We're also getting the auditory narration information. And so by 11 minutes, we've seen, we've gotten a whole relationship that's developed from the start until them being married. We found out that Ed can't have kids. We set up that she really wants to be a mom. I mean, so much gets set up narratively in 11 minutes. And we're fine with it. It is a comedy, of course, so we don't need super in-depth character development and motivation. And like Daniel said, the characters are somewhat simple, but they accomplish so much in those first 11 minutes that when after the title goes, we basically cut to the Arizona house, and we get this first great sort of, I guess we'd call it an action set piece. Like we're there for it, we're prepped and ready for it, and we're along for the ride. And I don't think I've never run into anyone who's like, I just don't believe that High would be breaking into the Arizona household, right? Because it's a comedy, and because they've done such good work in those first 11 minutes, we're totally along for the ride.
Yeah, you're basically in his head for that whole 11 minutes. I like that's a great point what you said, that like we're not repeating information. We're getting a visual story and an auditory story, and they're complementing each other, but they're not very much the same thing. No, I agree. And I think, getting into, let's just, break into that, the baby stealing sequence, which went on way longer than I was expecting. And just and it was kind of just like, what's his strategy here with just getting different babies out and placing them in different places around the room? I was like, why couldn't he have just taken one and left a little bit?
I think later I figured out, I think like based on that conversation in the vehicle, like we have the best one. I think for in some
one, maybe so.
Yeah, in some way that I didn't think they communicated very well, but he was trying to figure out who's the best baby, Yeah,
I know, and honestly, my favorite part of that is when he comes back without the baby, and he's like, "Yeah, it just didn't work out." And she's like, "No, you get baby or you don't come in here." Which at that point also, I think I was kind of like, we meet Ed as like a cop, and so theoretically her life is more together than High's. But then at that point, I'm like, okay, she's kind of as crazy as he is in her own way. And that was kind of, I guess, the full realization of that. But yeah, no, it was, and honestly, I think my favorite part was like cutting down to the Arizona parents at the bottom, and just kind of their interact. For one, it was like a very, again, Wes Anderson kind of framing, I think, where they're all fully in frame, and it's kind of just this ridiculous set of like leopard print, I think. It was like animal skin or something everywhere. And it's just kind of just, over the top in every way. But then you have these people that are just like, the wife is just like sitting there knitting or reading or whatever she is. And I thought the cutting down there when they're like kind of looking up, like, what are they playing telephone or whatever they're saying? That I really enjoyed. But I guess I was surprised they took so long to actually get the baby out of the house, because it is a few minutes up there.
Yeah, I mean that it is like an action sequence. I mean, and I think that's part of what's so fun is it's built around babies, right? I mean, it's like this whole action thing that's built around babies, and you're talking about the motivation for what High's doing, where he's pulling all the babies out, and Donovan, you're right. I think the idea is that he's trying to pick the best one, but they seemingly are identical, so so he can't figure it out. And I think also we just buy it with High, like he just seems so freaked out, and I think that is already showing us like Nicolas Cage and how great Nick Cage is as an actor, that he's just overwhelmed by these 5 choices, and it's like, which one am I supposed to pick? And I don't know why he's like putting one on a chair and one on the floor, but I believe it. I totally believe that this guy would do that, and then creates a lot of the humor with like the baby jumping out of the crib and landing on his butt. And by the way, as we start talking, I think we're going to also notice a lot of the really great visual things that the Coens are doing. So like there's the great shot underneath the crib where the baby's crawling towards the camera, and we see Nick Cage behind him, and he pulls him out. And then later on, we get the exact same framing when he's trying to escape Leonard Smalls, and he's going under the car towards the camera in the exact same framing, and Smalls pulls him out too, which is just great,
Yeah.
No, I agree. The framing, they definitely plan. Yeah, the framing was great throughout. It definitely felt like I mentioned before, you had those great like crane moves behind these crawling babies, that it felt like it was like an action sequence, but you're in this room that's like blue and with like toys everywhere. This like, it was also like, I guess it makes sense because there's 5 kids in there, but I also remember like seeing him like standing next to the crib, and it was almost like hilarious how big the crib was compared to, it's just like, it's again, it's a part of just kind of this absurd world where like, we'll put 5 kids to sleep in the same bed. That makes a lot of sense. Which there's one, I don't know. I've never had 5 kids at the same time. So.
Well, there's one thing there too that I think it goes back to Scott Pilgrim and Edgar Wright, is that like even in the opening montage, we're getting this VO, and then we're getting just these singular shots of these moments in time, and so it's like this is, I don't think they had a second camera for them. Maybe they did, but they were just like, hey, this is the whole scene, right? The whole moment in one shot, either behind them or whatever. And there's something we talked about in other previous podcasts of like the ballsiness of just like, here's one shot, here's all the information you're going to get. And even tying that to the humor, it's like, he didn't do like a quick cut to him being pulled out from the bed, something else. Like the humor is in the ballsiness also of staying in that shot. Right. And that's what makes it funny. And same thing with Edgar Wright is, the camera staying still and just characters doing stuff in the frame in the background is what makes it funny and makes it awkward and just kind of unnatural.
Another thing that I think is really great about that whole action sequence is how many different point of view shots are used. We've got point of view shots from the babies. We've got point of view shots from High, and there's point of view shots all through the movie, and they create a lot of the humor. But like when High leaves, like you mentioned, and Ed tells him to go back, and then he climbs back up the ladder, and Mrs. Arizona is holding one of the babies, and then we cut to the point of view of the baby seeing High out the window, and High is like waving through the window. It's just great shots, and the fact that they have the confidence to cut. So often, we think of point of view shots as being about alignment and sort of being with a particular character. And really they're using the point of view shots as a tool for comedy, right? It's not so much that we're aligned with the baby, it's the humor in seeing Nicolas Cage from the baby's point of view, and then cutting to the baby, and he's got these big eyes and he's smiling and laughing at Nicolas Cage, and again, it's not like a laugh out loud necessarily kind of moment, but it's still funny, and the way they use so much of, like we've been saying, all these different visual approaches to the humor. That this whole action sequence is a great example of it.
It's almost like cartoonish. It is. This whole movie
it's slapstick,
cartoonish. From his hairstyle or the different ways it is throughout the film. Which I read something. I don't know where I read this, but I read maybe it was on I don't know, about something about Nicolas Cage being like obsessed that his hair was the certain kinds of crazy for different scenes or something. But it is that kind of, it's the most lighthearted interpretation of a child abduction I think I've seen. Yeah. And it is kind of that, like, yeah, the babies are just like, yeah, man, this is awesome. Like, and throughout the whole film, like riding on the front of a motorcycle,
right,
falling off the hood of a car twice. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, yeah, man, this is chill. And as a father of a once baby, pretty inaccurate, but
well, there's
I'll let it go.
There's a couple of things there. I mean, one of them is, I didn't like just laugh out loud, but maybe a couple of times. There's one specific moment, one beat that we'll point out when we get to it that I actually like laughed out loud, really loud. But there's, it's slapstick, it's Looney Tunes, right? And so because of that, and because of the nature of it just being this zany world that, was just totally bonkers, we totally buy the fact that we have babies on the front of motorcycles and we have, God love it, or the grenade explosions,
guy, whipping out cigarette, like whipping out the cigar and then the match.
Yeah.
And
right. They just sort of drop down into his hand. Yeah.
I think that subplot was like my favorite thing just because of, obviously I like that kind of shit, but
I liked him. I could not understand him when he was talking very well. I was like reading the script and I was like, oh, that's what he said. Oh, okay. That's what he said.
But the reason why that works, Daniel, why the baby endangerment works is because like look here, the first 11 minutes we're getting to know Holly and Ed and Hi, and then the next 7 minutes, which is basically the baby abduction up until the car moment, we're seeing Holly just gush and cry about how much she loves this baby she just met, right? And because she's a good actress, and then B, it's so sincere, and you're like, she genuinely cares about this baby. Like, I totally buy that this baby, I think the baby's gonna be okay, actually. Like, he's gonna be loved, like
at least not intentionally.
He's gonna be loved. He may not be okay, but he's gonna be
not intentionally harmed. Yes, there was no nefarious intentions. But you bring that up. I think that's another kind of credit to the beginning and almost to the setup of Hyde being in and out of jail like 4 times. And just the approach, like, well, we call that's a repeat offender, and it's like, well, are you telling me the truth? Yes. Okay, then, and it's like this kind of complete farce of what the justice system actually is and how the justice system actually treats repeat offenders, and stuff like that. So it's kind of this like, oh yeah, so this is like the consequences are pretty light, even to, like it kind of sets up like, well, we're not actually afraid that they're going to like go to jail for kidnapping. I never was. You know what I mean? It's always like, well, yeah.
By the end of it, the consequences are extremely light.
Oh yeah.
I was almost, not to spoil anything, I was half expecting the guy to be like, take him. I was waiting for it,
I've gotten used to this, and 4 is better than 5. Yeah.
But part of the magic is that it's not believable in the real world, but like Daniel's saying, the movie does such a great job of setting up this world that we buy all of it in this world, and no matter what crazy stuff happens, we're like, yeah. And even, we'll talk about the ending, but even what Nathan Arizona does, and like, I didn't even go like, oh, come on, I mean, it just, you believe it, and you believe it because it's a comedy. You believe it because of the world. You believe it because the movie has layered in this sentimentality that you're on board with. That then when he does what he does, it works.
Yeah, and well, maybe we can say that, but I do think there's interesting things to say about Mr. Arizona, and he kind of went ways I was kind of expecting them to go, I guess, more traditional ways, I guess, with him, or make him to be more of like an antagonist. But he ends up really not being, and being really more a source of more humor and kind of absurdity. But thinking about what's next, which is they go home and he's showing the baby around the living room, and kind of the big happening is Gail and Evel breaking out and coming over, but the actual plot of this takes place in, I guess, 24 hours ish.
It's actually 3 days. Takes place over 3 days.
Well, Well, the
Yeah,
family comes and visits him first, remember?
Yeah, and the act structure actually, I mean,
Yes.
not including the first 10 minutes, obviously,
That's right.
but
Yeah, no, yeah. I was talking about kind of once we get into the real time.
from the title until the end of Act 1 is one day, Act 2 is the second day, and Act 3 is the third day. So actually, as we dig into it, one of the things that's kind of neat about it is that the movie is got this really neat structure that I think is not it's not obvious when you're watching it, but when you go back and you look, you're like, oh, this is actually really clever the way that they put this together. So yeah, I mean, the first act is basically going to end right around the 29-minute mark, where Gail and Neville have broken out of jail. They've come over because it's the same night, right? I mean, it's the same night that they kidnap Nathan Jr. They have all that discussion, and then he has his dream, right? And that dream is the Act 1 climax, right?
Yeah. I've been with Katie for 2 years, and she has never told me to turn the TV down. But whenever he broke out of prison, he just in there screaming for like 2 minutes straight.
I love that.
I get a text and like, will you please turn the TV down? And I was like, oh no, it happened.
There's a lot of yelling. And also like the whole thing felt like this weird, like, birth homage, like this, like,
yeah, absolutely, it is.
Like it's like this. I feel like I'm watching like a fucked up I didn't
even catch that,
like birth video in science class in 8th grade or something.
Yeah,
well, he ends up pulling him by the foot.
Kind of exactly.
Yeah. The Earth gives birth to both of them, and then in the end they crawl back in. Before we talk about. Before we talk about those guys, and I agree, they're definitely like the catalyst for the second half of the first act. I do want to mention one last thing, kind of coming out of the kidnapping, which one of you guys alluded to, which is when Ed is holding the baby, and then she bursts into tears, and she's like, I love him so much. That to me is hilarious. Like that for me was a laugh out loud moment. And one of the great things about it is this combination of utter sincerity and sentimentality, and complete humor at the same time. Like you're totally laughing at her, and yet she's completely sincere, and you believe it, right?
Well, and then the other line,
rope to walk. Yeah,
and then the other line, she's like, are we sure we didn't make a mistake? This is a lot of responsibility. You know what I mean? It's just like those kind of lines. You're like, oh my god, like that is the kind of like she's being for real. But it's like, that's the mistake she's identifying is like, was this even a good idea to have a baby? Let alone
take someone else's baby,
yes,
right?
Yes.
But I love this, even the sentiment of High coming to the house, and he like runs to his bedroom and puts the porno up, and then he pulls it out and looks at it one more time, and then puts it back in there. Kind of like, I can't sin anymore in this house, and taking the photo with him, of course, which is a famous photo, I guess, from what I found out later. But no, it's all of it is so. I think the biggest thing, Bruce, the word is sincere. It's all sincere, which makes it so much more fun and
endearing. Like it makes the characters more endearing and more likable. Like
well, and I think and they're such great actors, Nicolas Cage and Holly Hunter, is even though it feels a lot of times like a cartoon and kind of simple at the same time. These motivations, even though they're direct and simply formed, Ed wanting to be a mother and High struggling with being, sort of a straight citizen. You feel the depth of the emotions of those characters, so even though they're kind of these cartoony one-dimensional characters, they become three-dimensional because they're so well acted and because we relate to the things that they want, even if those things are a little stereotyped, especially for Ed wanting to be a mom. But yeah, I mean, and they both go on an emotional journey that I think is very real, right? They come to understand things about themselves and about each other that a lot of people never do. So yeah, all of that's happening. And then of course we get Gail and Ethel.
Yeah,
they're great.
I love them putting like all the pomade and shit in their hair, just like slapping it on. Like this is what's going to do it for us, like not the mud, not the everything else, but this is what we needed,
Right.
Yeah, and I think specifically Ethel is just the best to me. I think he's like, it's like these are guys who are like talking about going on like a robbery spree, you know, and then he's like, you know, minutes later, like, oh, the baby smiled at me, you know what I mean, and like getting all this emotion. And I thought, I feel like once they came in, like the action definitely picked, or like the humor picked up a bit for me. I think I really liked them and Ed's scenes together, or their interactions together. With kind of High smashed in the middle of like the social awkwardness. And again, it's like what you're saying. It's like they're taking these kind of like cliche married couple scenarios. Oh, well, like the wife doesn't love the husband's friends that are still single or still living the bachelor life or whatever. You know, you've seen that in sitcoms like 100 times. But it is like, but they're like, yeah, but come rob with us. You know what I mean? Like, like that's the life they're trying to get him to go on. But yeah, you know, Earl and Gale, good guys.
Yeah.
I'm partial to Gale just because I'm a huge John Goodman fan.
Oh yeah.
And of course, you know, Barton Fink and all the other Coen brother movies. He's great. He's amazing in, and I just always loved him as an actor. And always. Was this his first Coen brothers film?
Yeah, I'm sure, but because I think it's only their second movie after Blood Simple.
Yeah,
I didn't look that up, but I think that's right. So
no, you're right.
This guy back for all the rest. Literally almost all of them.
He's an amazing actor.
Yeah.
But no, like, you know, of course, we pick up right around the 23, 24 minute mark. I know this because the movie's playing right in front of me, and it's my secret trick on the podcast. And they come in, of course, and he does his little John Wayne with the gun, and now they're entertaining the guys, and of course, you know, it's contradictory to this family lifestyle that Ed wants, and he of course feels, you know, at least loyal to the sense that these were the guys that he, you know, survived with or whatever with while he was in jail. Which starts creating this tension between them and also the tension in the movie in general with, you know, obviously we're fixing to get to the part where the reward comes in.
Right. Yeah. So before we get to that, which basically is the start of Act 2, right? You know, we do have the dream that ends Act 1 where High imagines or dreams of Leonard Smalls and sort of wakes up with this feeling that there is this impending doom coming, right? I want to see if you guys think I'm stretching this too much because, you know, this is just a fun comedy, but there is something dark in that, and I wonder how much of that dream about Leonard Smalls is High dreaming about his own darkness and him taking a darker path. One thing that's never explained that we see much later in the movie when Smalls and High are fighting is the revelation that they both have the same tattoo. You know, so I think that in some ways the movie is drawing a parallel between them in the sense that Leonard is like the worst possible version of High, right? You know, if High sort of took his criminality to the extreme, maybe he fears that he would become something like Leonard. I don't know. I mean, that's obviously digging pretty deep into a slapstick type of movie. But the dream is there for a reason, and the matching tattoos are there for a reason.
Well, and the whole thing with High is kind of, and especially once, you know, we get into Act 2 and 3, is him like, what is, he talks about his nature a lot, and that's a lot of even what Evel and Gale kind of play on, you know, to get him to, you know, kind of join up with them in the scheme, is like, you know, it's in his nature. And like, and obviously the other big point is when he robs the grocery store for the Huggies, right? And it's like, you know, it's like one of those things of like, it's out of nowhere, but it's not, because of, you know, who this character is. And then they had that whole argument, and he's like, you know, well, it's just my nature, you know, I'm just, you know, I'm doing the best I can, basically. But, you know, you might say that like the ending of the film is and you know, we can save that a little bit, but like, it's, you know, is High questioning his nature? Is this the movie of him questioning his criminal his criminality. I mean, maybe this is a good question. Do you guys expect High to keep being a criminal post credits? Because I'm not sure I do. I don't know. Like it's almost like, again, the kind of cartoonish simpleness of this film, of this world of like, well, you know, he was going down a wrong path until he kidnapped a baby. And this whole series of events happened that changed his heart. And now, you know, he's set straight to an extent. Now I will say, I'm sure he will break the law inadvertently many times. Not to say that, but like, as far as robbing convenience stores, I don't know. Like there's something that like feels like, well, maybe they learned something, you know, about life through all of this. And that's kind of, I hadn't thought about, you know, Lenny being kind of that, representing that in him, or the tattoos being that. In fact, you know, when the tattoos happened, I thought he was gonna be like, hey man, look, same tattoo. And like, that's how he like ends the fight or something. That felt in line for this movie to me.
I'll answer that question at the end, because I think, to me, it all ties into this final dream sequence. And
Sure.
I think there's a specific thing I want to say for the end, and I think it's tied. These two dream sequences it matters. And but I will say that I thought the same thing too. I thought when we saw the tattoo initially that it would be like, hey man, we're in the same prison, or we had the same whatever. Yeah. But to your thing, Bruce, I don't think it's going deep at all. I think it's 100% on the money. I don't really know that many more interpretations that could be close. Right. I think that's pretty much it, in my opinion. I mean, this guy's he's a force of nature, but also he is definitely, I mean, he even has a tattoo that says "Mama didn't love me." Right. So, I mean, like, it definitely, we're seeing something there about, you know, a child without a loving parent. So it's like, he just literally got a new kid. And so it's like that, or even what will my son become if I'm not a good parent? So there's all these little different things that you can extrapolate from that there. I do think, and maybe I just totally missed this, and I'm not really jumping ahead too far, but do we even know, like, how did Leonard, he's just like this guy, it's like he's like he just knows shit. Like, he knows to be here, he knows to follow, you know what I'm saying? There's something mystical about this guy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I assumed, like, well, because he shows up in physical form when, like, at the when they're investigating Evel and Gail's escape. So I was almost like, well, maybe the prison hired him to find these two dudes, and then he kind of got wind of the baby plot and the reward. But I mean, that's obviously me kind of stretching or filling in gaps for the movie a little bit there. But. Well,
yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things with him. I mean, on a very practical level, you know, we're going to have Nathan Arizona, you know, on the news. But, you know, it's interesting because he's introduced in a dream, but the dream sort of just becomes reality, and we don't really differentiate them. So he almost seems to, you could almost say he like comes out of High's mind into reality. I mean, that's what we experience. I mean, I'm not arguing that's literally what happens, you know, in the world of the movie. But yeah, he is definitely, you know, he seems to have knowledge that nobody else should have. He seems to figure out how to he knows how to do things. I mean, he's this bounty hunter that just figures things out, you know. He is a force of nature. By the way, I have to say that I one of my favorite parts of the movie is his introduction and when he blows up the rabbit and shoots the lizard off the rock.
It's incredible.
It is so funny.
One thing that's interesting, even hear me thinking about it, is like, even now, I don't think, like, that dream sequence, I don't think that was real life. Like, I think that was a dream sequence, even though it totally could just be you know, that's happening while he's also sleeping, and we're kind of combining the two. But even though there is zany things at the end that are very exactly like this dream sequence that are actually happening in canon and the narrative, I still think they're separate. And I just think it's almost like, I think I'm making it more mystical by thinking that he almost, like you're saying, he conjured him or something, because there was a moment in the movie, like a half a second, I was like, are they the same guy? Like, there was a moment, like, at the very end, I thought there'd be some type of craziness happening, and it didn't pan out that way really quickly. But still, I think that I don't know. I for some reason think he may have created him in some weird way. I don't know. Maybe I'm totally off.
Well, the movie certainly, you know, well, I mean, it's interesting. And one other thing, I was just sort of watching that little sequence at the end of the dream, you know, and we're cutting, you know, High is all sweaty and he's moving in his sleep. And, you know, after sort of the humor of blowing up the animals, you know, Leonard Spike jumps through the air and then lands at the Arizona household. And then there's a POV from the motorcycle that doesn't make any sense, you know, logically, where it goes up the ladder into the window and then zooms in on Mrs. Arizona, who screams looking directly into the camera, which very much aligns then High with Leonard Smalls, right? I mean, they kind of become the same thing in terms of High's dream, you know, and imagining that he's responsible, right, which he is, for the kidnapping of this baby, which, you know, he is almost sort of put into the Leonard Smalls character, who turns out to be real later on, you know, which is just a really interesting.
And he's exactly the same. Like there's no costume change. Like it's just the same guy. It's him incarnate.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is like that, regardless of how you view whether the dream is also real life or not, the Coens are using the dream to introduce the character, right? And so, like you said, we're seeing the tattoo, we're seeing the baby shoes hanging off the belt, we're seeing him blow up the animals. So, and all of those things are accurate to who Leonard is when we meet him, you know, in real life.
Yeah, like he keeps blowing up animals, etc. Yes.
Is there some religious parallel here that I'm missing also? Because I keep thinking like there is some like, I don't know. I'm not an aficionado on religion. I'll be the first one to tell you, but there's something here. Something's pulling me to think something like this.
No, I mean, I think he definitely is like the representation of evil, or like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, and I guess, I mean, I don't know if we have a representation of good, but he definitely, he kind of has this kind of like, I think also just like the desert setting to me kind of has this like devil at the crossroads almost feel to him, of this kind of, you know, demon from the spawn of the, you know, the desert. I don't know. Like he definitely feels more, he's almost more mystical than everything else is. And even though there's definitely a level of like kind of mysticalness to the rest. I don't see direct.
I think to me it's like deeper, you know, almost primordial forces, you know, and he represents sort of this very dark evil. And Daniel, you couldn't have described Coen brother movies in general better than you just did when you were like, I think he represents evil, but I don't know if anything represents good. That's the Coen brothers, right? The Coen brothers, almost every movie, and maybe there is some exception here, is like there's evil and then there's middle of the road, right? You know, there really isn't true good in Coen brother movies. There's people who are deeply, deeply flawed, who are kind of normal, and then there's true evil, right? But you rarely have good characters. You know, if there is a good character, it might be Ed, but of course, I mean, Ed still kidnaps a baby, but she's as close as we can get to a good character.
I would almost say, to me, High is a little bit more morally pure than even Ed is to me a little bit. I mean, High just wants to make his wife happy, you know what I mean? And like be a good husband or whatever. Like, and in fact, until the whole baby thing happens, he seemingly was content in like working his, you know, day shift and, you know, coming home to the life they had and stuff like that. So I feel like,
well, there's a simplicity to High. He's not doing anything to hurt anybody. He's just doing things, and he's also just doing things to survive or to serve his own desires in the moment.
You know,
yeah.
Well, and we can take both of them at their word, I think, when they say, like, especially at the end, when it's like, you know, the Arizonas had 5 babies, you know, and it was more than they could handle, and did they really need all 5, you know? And it's like, I think Ed, I don't know that she really believes it, because obviously she comes to understand that what she did was wrong by the end of the movie. But I think she's sort of like tricked herself into believing it, and she really does believe it when I mean, we don't spend much time on it, but she's told herself a lie, and I think she believes the lie, and so in Kidnapping the Baby, there really isn't bad intent, it really is something that they think that they're doing, that they can make themselves happy without hurting somebody else. And of course, there's also a bit of a class issue there too, right?
Sure.
It's not a mistake that probably the richest people in town have more kids than they know what to do with, right?
And I love that it's an unpainted furniture store.
Right. And some of the poorest people living in a trailer park, can't even have kids when they want it,
There is something that maybe we can talk about later,
Yeah.
but the setting of the movie, I love the fact that, it's kind of right in this moment when after this dream sequence, after the guys, they wake up and the guys are there eating breakfast, they tell them basically, hey, you need to leave. We have other friends coming over. And I'm kind of skipping ahead, but during the outside scenes here, when we're kind of getting the dynamic of, all these other kids in a different family, I love the setting. I love seeing cacti in the background. Like there's a shot when they're walking towards the camera. It's like a long tracking two shot, and you see the cacti in the background, like really high. And I love it. Like you don't see that in movies. Like you don't see that setting very often.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a barren world, and of course that is a little bit metaphor for the, High describes Ed as, I forget what he's, is like,
Desert flower.
Barren ground where my seed could take no purchase or whatever, right? And then that's literally their surroundings as well. Before we really launch into the plot aspects of Act 2, I want to mention one other thing, which I think is super important to the movie, and that is when High wakes up from his dream, Ed is singing a lullaby to Nathan Jr., and it's this murder ballad.
Yes.
And and she's singing this beautiful song that sounds beautiful, but it's all about hanging this guy, right? And hanging him on the scaffold and all this kind of stuff. And of course, it overlaps with High having this dream. And then that same song, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but it's that same song that actually is used throughout a lot of the rest of the movie, including the final fantasy scene. It's the same music. It's just, it's given a different, the melody is played with different instruments, and we don't have the lyrics, and suddenly it becomes this wistful song at the end, but it's the same murder ballad.
That's funny.
Melody that we have her singing, which is, I
didn't
think,
catch that. That's interesting.
Really ties a lot of these themes that we're talking about these characters struggling to be good people, but sort of trying to navigate the darkness and what's right and what's wrong.
No, that's interesting. I didn't catch that. And now I won't lie. And this happens every time we do these things. Like I watch the movie, we talk about it, and then I'm like, I have to go watch the movie again. Right afterwards. Granted,
the movies I suggest I've seen a bunch of times.
For sure.
And it always happens that you guys either have only seen it once or not at all. So I do have you at a bit of a disadvantage. So
right. No, I know. And but that's great. I want to go back and watch it again. No, what do you think that means though? Like what having that same song play, do you think it's just a thematic thing, or do you think there's something else deeper there narratively?
I think to me, it sort of digs into what we were talking about, in terms of Daniel's comment of evil character, but no good characters, which is, maybe there are no good characters. And, I think you could say this sort of as a Cohen philosophy, because people generally aren't good with a capital G, so, and we see this in a lot of movies. And it's not like a super original idea that human beings are complicated and they have light and dark in them, and they do good things and they do bad things. And I think that's what we're seeing with both, High and Ed, and this song about hanging of a murderer and all of this stuff, is sort of the dark side of that song. And then we, being sung by Ed, and then later on we've got the same song being used in the opposite fashion, right? To be the melody of, High imagining a future in which he and Ed are happy together and have lots of children, and all that kind of stuff. And so just like human beings can be good and bad, it's almost like the song, has this dark side to it, but also has this light side to it.
That's awesome. I need to go back and watch this movie. Okay, let's get into the beginning of Act 2 here. So we know that, again, the new couple's coming over. Back up. I do like seeing Gail and Evel. There's like something disgusting about someone eating cereal and smoking a cigarette.
Right. Yes.
I don't know, like something about it. It just like grosses me out. I'm like, they cannot.
Yes.
The milk and the smoke cannot go well together. It just can't happen.
No.
But anyway, they send these guys on their way because they're not upstanding people and they don't want to, it makes even logical sense. Like High says about them coming in and they could obviously get caught and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But they were treated into, High being forced to see almost like it's like, you could have too many kids and here's like the responsibility that you're fixing to face these kids who are unruly. And I think that's kind of what I got out of it a little bit. And of course it's, this obviously it's setting up the fact that High punches, I don't know the guy's name.
Glenn,
Sam McMurray. Okay. Yeah. Glenn. And punches Glenn, which obviously sets up some more chaos for him down the road. What do you guys think about it?
Yeah, there's also this well, first of all, I agree. I really love the moments with them eating the cereal and the whole got a lot of social engagements, whatever he says about when they're kind of, and it's one of those kind of like classic married couple scenarios where the wife has her friends over and the guy just wants to go drink beer at the bar, but he's gonna have to go be social or whatever, just kind of those classic sitcom scenarios, and and just kind of amped up to this absurdity to 10, I guess. Right. But I love, again, it's like just like the little comments that aren't acknowledged that come from aliens, like, who wears the pants around here, High? You know what I mean? But no one acknowledges that kind of comment. It just they just kind of make comments about what they're seeing with kind of impunity, almost.
Well, I think that comment gets a reaction out of him. I think he stands up from that comment. He reacts strongly to that, I think, when he says, who wears the pants around here? And it's like, I can't remember what he does, but he does something. And she basically shuts him down really quick, I think. But
there is this, a big part of what we're seeing there is the way Gail pushes High's buttons. Gail, it's kind of funny because Gail turns out to be kind of lovable too, but he's clearly not a good guy. He's manipulative. Clearly, he's very manipulative. He's trying to push High in a bad direction. He pushes buttons that for the most part, seem to work. That is, he does seem to be able to get under High's skin, in terms of teasing him and making fun of him about this whole thing about sort of, High loves Ed and Ed runs, and I think High's happy to let Ed run the family, but also, it's also a male thing. It's a prison thing. He can't look like that's what he is okay with in front of, his former prison mates,
Mm. Yeah. And then, I think once we get to Glenn and his family, I love the kind of the contrast, even just with how the kids act compared to Nathan Jr., who literally doesn't cry the whole movie, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think he cries once. And then this hurricane of destruction that these other children are, and just even the parents' complete lack of discipline or even attempts at discipline. I also like it because it's kind of I feel like we might be getting to some of High being seeing some sort of potential future of what it's like when kids get older, and maybe less controllable. And obviously I think that plays into kind of his stress level that's just kind of constantly building from here all the way into the next big action sequence. And I would almost say the action sequence is kind of his release from all the tension that's building up, through these sequences.
Absolutely. I think you're 100% right. I mean, seeing how the kids behave, fearing for that same thing for himself, punching Glenn and realizing that he's lost his job and probably believing that he can't walk, the straight and narrow path. And then it's like, they're in the car and he's like, the kid needs some Huggies, right?
Huggies, you know what I mean?
Right. And then he's robbing the mart. And then we get our next big, really amazing action sequence.
No, it was hilarious. And this, I'll go over that. The next action sequence was probably my favorite, just in terms of humor too. And it really had more to do with all the people around him rather than High himself, and just kind of the reaction, the amount of gun shorekeepers that keep shooting at him. It's just kind of like, and it's partly, I think, realistic a little bit, probably, especially if you think back in the 80s in Arizona, and like probably everyone was packing a lot of the time. You know what I mean? Like in this kind of holding on to like the last vestiges of cowboyism or whatever. But it's just kind of like, he gets out of one thing and then he just starts getting shot. And he's just like, what the hell? And he turns and then there's another guy with a, double barrel shotgun or this giant Magnum or whatever it is. And I really like that sequence. But, as I was saying, I think it makes so much more sense. Both him doing that, deciding to just rob for the Huggies, and even the conversation that he has with Ed once she finally picks him up. Being like, it's just my nature, you know what I mean? And kind of like he's confronted with what life as a love, what I'm trying to think of the right term, is like a good husband, doing the wife is, doing what the wife wants, being there for the wife's, desires, hanging out with other adult families with kids and kind of doing this normal life stuff, and then being like, you know what, I'd rather just rob a store. You know what I mean? That this makes me more comfortable than hanging out with Glenn.
Well, I think he thinks he's bad at it, he's bad at being, I think he thinks he can't do it. It's not so much, I think, that the robbing is more comfortable. I think he wants to do good by Ed. I think he just doesn't believe he can, and so after that chase sequence, he comes back, and then Gail and Evel show him the picture of the bank from the newspaper and tell him their whole crime scheme. And I think he's convinced, right? I think he's convinced because I think he pretty much says it in the letter that he writes to Ed, which, by the way, is sort of the parallel to the dream and the fantasy, right? Of the dream at the end of Act 1 and the fantasy at the end of Act 3. This is the parallel in the ending of Act 2, is him writing this letter and then reading it in voiceover and basically telling us, like, he can't be the guy that he thinks he needs to be for Ed, right? I mean, he basically is a failure at that, which is why he's decided he's going to go rob the bank, which of course doesn't happen. But yeah.
No, you're right. And I do want to take a slight second here, and I want to put my 2 cents in of it's a great sequence from beginning to end of just how they do not even cause and effect. It's he's running a gauntlet, and everything just gets in front of him constantly. And I love the fact that the cops are just like, who gives a fuck? We're going to shoot in the grocery stores. And like it's so crazy. And even like a shot where when she gets back in the car and she punches him, that's totally Edgar Wright. Like that's the way it rack focuses to him in the front of the camera. And it's like this foreground background play there. I mean, all that, him grabbing the Huggies off the road. It's just, that's actually pretty incredible. And I got to give props when props are due.
I think my favorite, the parts where I did laugh out loud is there's one point where like a cop car is like kind of skidding into a stop, and the cop just like flies out of the window from the momentum of the move, which is like, when you're watching, you're like, yeah, that might happen if you're doing a move like that in a car, if someone's hanging out the window or something. But it's just kind of this thing, and the cop just like kind of slapsticks against the rag dolls or whatever, and it's just,
well, part of the best part of it is just Nicolas Cage acting in it. It's just like, he's not phased. It's like, this is normal. This is it. This is right. Like it's like a football player running the game right now.
Yeah.
And he's hyper focused, but like it's not like he's stressed out really. He's just kind of like he's doing it, it's pretty incredible.
One other thing I want to point out about the chase sequence that I think kind of plays in a lot of the things we've been talking about is the dogs.
Oh yeah.
So, at first we have sort of the stereotypical, dog on a chain that sort of runs the end of the chain and sort of hits it, and then he kind of escapes. And then all the other dogs end up, in the neighborhood, end up becoming part of the chase and following him. And just like we talked about with like the kidnapping of the baby, we've got this chase in which people are being shot at constantly and people could die at any moment. And yeah, we're already in a comedy, so we don't necessarily need it, but the dogs just make everything like happy, because the dogs are just having the time of their life, just running through the grocery store, and we pick them up again where they're the woman with I think the curlers is running with the cart, and then we see that all the dogs are chasing her, and so the dogs, which we almost always associate with goodness in movies, just like the whole cliche of you can't kill a dog, the dogs are almost there to help us remember that this is all fun, that nobody's gonna get hurt.
I'm glad you brought up the dogs chasing the cart, because that's a great example of filmmaking of like it's like showing the reaction and then showing the cause of what's happening, because it's like lower shot, you see them down. When I saw it watching, I was like, oh, that's great. That's a great like way they did that and just kind of revealing information. So that's really cool. It's a really cool moment.
I also want to mention one other thing. I do like Edgar Wright, and Scott Pilgrim is my favorite Edgar Wright movie, and I think he's fantastic. But one of the things, and maybe it's just more contemporary filmmaking, but I think he can be, I would criticize him a little bit for, especially in Baby Driver, which I want to watch again, is the way in which Baby Driver seems like it's a Raising Arizona kind of movie. And then it's been a while since I've watched it. I don't know if it's halfway or 2/3 of the way through the movie. Suddenly it becomes insanely violent, and not just violent in a comic book way, but in a violent way where people get killed in really sort of horrible ways. And to me, that tonal shift is problematic in Baby Driver, because you think you're getting a Raising Arizona movie and you've been set up to expect that, and then suddenly you're getting these violent deaths that don't quite fit into that world. And I almost think he could have taken a lesson for Baby Driver from Raising Arizona, where even when there is a death, it's almost a comic death. I mean, the only death we get is Leonard Smalls. And when Leonard Smalls blows up, I mean, it's like the Death Star blowing up, right? I mean, the explosion is way out of
there's like fire
alignment with the amount of right. And so even Leonard, who we don't mind dying, but it's still done in an over-the-top humorous way, right? So anyway, that was a bit of an aside.
No, I mean, two things. One, Scott Pilgrim is a perfect movie in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then two, it's my favorite as well. And then two, I would love to do Baby Driver, because I saw it once in theaters and I own it, but I have not watched it since theaters, and I've been dying to rewatch it for about
I do that too,
because
I remember really liking it. I've only seen it in theaters as well, but I remember.
Yeah, I do that. Yeah, I'd enjoy watching Baby Driver.
I remember liking it, but there was just something, and maybe it's what your point is, there was something about it that just kept it from elevating to like high level status. But I remember liking it, but just wasn't blown away by it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's great. What, Daniel?
Let's get into Act 3.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it is pretty amazing that Act 2 is basically the visit with Glenn, the chase, and then the discussion of the bank and the letter, and suddenly Act 2 is over. I mean, it's amazing. And it's almost 30 minutes how fast all that goes. And then we go into Act 3.
Well, it is a short movie too, which I think,
yeah,
I'm after watching that, I was like, oh man, I miss short movies. Like it's like
90 minutes, 30-minute acts, just boom, 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 boom. Yeah.
And there's something beautiful. Like I love television, but I love the structure of a movie in that short amount of time. And it's just to me, it's so digestible, and just, you feel like, hey, I could watch another movie if I wanted to. So yeah, something great about it. No, Daniel, you're right. Let's start Act 3. So we have, I think this is where Leonard kind of really starts coming in, right? We know now there's a reward system out there for for Nathan Jr. And we know that Leonard is basically coming in to talk to Nathan Sr. Is that his name? Or Arizona Sr.
Yeah.
He's Nathan
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, and I think, I don't know if you, I guess it's into Act 2, but the letter that High writes, I do think there's something interesting about kind of just plot wise what they do with this character moment, because obviously this is like kind of High giving up, right? Giving up on what Ed wants, what he thought he wanted, or whatever it is. But we never really resolve that, and really High doesn't. He ends up not giving up, but it has nothing to do with a decision that he has made. It's kind of a consequence of other things that are happening that causes him to stick around and kind of stick with it. And even so much so that, like, I think later on when, and maybe this is a little bit later in the act, but when we're kind of having this discussion with him and Ed, and it's the whole, like, I don't think, we're not good for each other, and Ed's kind of breaking up with him or having that kind of preemptive breakup discussion. And like, it's almost like now at the time, I don't think I questioned it, but I'm thinking about now, I'm like, well, like a couple hours ago, he was leaving her. And I guess it was kind of this, like, I still love you, but I'm leaving because it's not good, versus like, well, then she says she loves him too. I guess I just feel like there's not really a resolution, and we've kind of been tracking this, like, this character arc for High of, like, being a criminal, wanting to not be a criminal, wanting to try to be this different kind of person, giving up, but then kind of just the cause and effect that takes place really because of things that happened in the previous act kind of takes that decision away from him. And we kind of just, once we kind of catch up with that idea, he's kind of almost moved past it, I guess.
Yeah, but I think it all tracks. I mean, I think you're right. You have to track it closely, but he has given up, and I can't remember exactly what he says in the letter, but I have the feeling like whatever money he gets from the robbery, he's going to send.
Yeah, well, he says
to Ed and the baby.
Yeah, I can't. He's like, less not Terry, or whatever he says. This like language, but he's like, better to send you money and you curse my name, which I think was a great
right. Exactly.
line.
Yeah,
love that line.
But it is interesting because, I mean, you're right. He has given up, but then, and interestingly, Glenn comes to the house, right? And Glenn has figured out who Nathan Jr. is. And then, of course, Gail and Evel overhear this. But it's interesting. It actually reminds me of the movie Witness, which we could do Witness someday if you haven't seen Witness. But there's a key thing in Witness where, the character's violent. He reacts violently when he shouldn't, and that act of violence comes back around on him and puts everything at risk that he's trying to protect. And the exact same thing happens here, right? It's the fact that he punched out Glenn that then causes Glenn to come back around and say the stuff and is overheard, and then causes Nathan Jr. to be kidnapped, right, by Gail and Evel. So it's his own fault that this thing has happened. So I think that's part of the motivation for him to suddenly be back in the saddle. And then also it's the world he's familiar with, right? He can join forces with Ed and be back and not giving up because he's going after criminals, right? Which, not that he's a cop, but this is his world. He gets a gun. He's like, we're going to get this baby. And he's all fired up because, this is kind of more his element, right? And then you're right. Now we just get lost in that and we don't really think about it. But then Ed's like, we're not a good match. We love each other, but we're not mature enough to be able to live this life, right? And that's kind of where we're going to end the movie in sort of our last discussion. We'll discuss at the end, but
yeah, no, but like you said, it worked. Like it's only like now having kind of more closely tracked like his arc of trying to be this different person and giving up or failing or whatever it is. Now it's like, oh wow, well, it like sitting here now critiquing it, I'm like, well, that's a slight thread dangling, but again, it doesn't like, and probably again because we've accepted the absurdity of this world and just kind of the slapstick nature and just and it is that kind of like, I mean, the one thing that happens to distract them all from that issue is, you know, Nathan Jr. gets taken, you know what I mean? So it all tracks and it all makes sense and it all feels cause and effect, like properly caused and affected, you know, as they say. But yeah, I know it was just kind of something I realized when we were just kind of thinking here. Yeah. So, but yes, this is also
we hit our big action sequence for Act 3,
and it's my favorite one for sure, just because of the Gale and I love. We just, you know, they're on the road and these first he's like, man, I love driving. It was just like, what? You know, it's just like one of those lines, but I love it because it's like almost, to me, it was almost this meta level of like, well, here's a throwaway line. You know what I mean? Of this, like, let's just have him say something to start the scene. He's just gonna say, I love driving while they're driving down the road. I don't know. It tickled me when that's how they started the scene.
Yeah, I like that sequence a lot too. And, you know, Donovan had mentioned the screaming from the prison break, and we get a lot of screaming again. I can't think of another movie where characters yelling and screaming almost becomes like a motif, you know, sort of this thematic motif. And when they realize that they lost Nathan Jr., and they start screaming, and they just keep screaming. And that's the funny thing, I think, both about the prison break and then when we have it here, is they don't just scream once, they just keep screaming and screaming. And I think High does it at one point too, where he yells and yells, and it's sort of like these men who are sort of completely inarticulate and, you know, have no language for what they're feeling. All they can do is yell, right?
Does it when they tie him up? Yeah, when they tie him up after they. Yeah.
Well, that's actually my favorite. I think the funniest part of the movie is when Ed and High and Gale are fighting, and you get this great fight sequence. It's just crazy. Yeah. But the funniest part to me, I legitimately like laughed out loud pretty hard, was when Nicolas Cage goes back and his hands burn across the ceiling of the roof. Yes. When that happened, I lost it.
Well, it was like the one thing that it was like, well, that is not realistic at all. Like,
well, see, I thought it was funny because for some reason, I found it kind of very realistic and like just very painful. And also just, I thought it was so clever and something I never would have thought of my entire filmmaking career, that I thought it was brilliant. And anyway, it blew me away.
Part of what makes that whole fight sequence, you know, it's so well shot, but a big part of it is the idea of a knockdown, drag out fight in a mobile home, right? Yeah. And so I think part of the idea of the realism of the scraping of the knuckles is that the ceiling is so low because they live in a mobile home. And so the fact that like when he's holding on to Gale and Gale's spinning him around, and he's basically like that's the entire size of the mobile home, and he's like kicking the lamp off the table on one wall, and he's hitting the wall on the opposite side, and, you know, basically he's being swung around the entire diameter of where he lives. I think is just really clever.
No, but there's also a thing too about just, again, it's, you know, I watched Snake Eyes over the weekend, and I'm fixing to have a scathing review on the channel come out pretty soon. But one thing that this movie does better than Snake Eyes is that it has this cause and effect in the fight.
I just want to bottle. You know, one thing that Raising Arizona really does better than Snake Eyes. In fact, you should probably bring up this movie in your review.
I've already written it all out, but but there's this idea that, in like, again, it's just the care and the thoughtfulness of like, we're going to have action informed character and action informed story that you just, a lot of times filmmakers don't get, which it blows my mind when you have hundreds of millions of dollars and you can't sit there and spend time to think, how can we make, I think action should always reinforce the story. That's why it's there. I mean, it's cool. I love seeing cool shit happen. Don't get me wrong. I like Transformers. I like it all, but it should always serve the narrative. And in this case, it does. And it's something that I just won't understand.
And then they kidnap Nathan Jr., and if I remember correctly, then he comes back in, walks through all the trash, and finds the Dr. Spock book.
Yes,
right,
which is perfect because it's like this little gag that's went through the whole movie now.
Right, exactly.
Like we need this to raise a child.
Well, then they leave it at the end with the crib. They leave it there
exactly, and it's all covered in ink and burned up and everything. Yeah.
But so we get them. Obviously, you're right, doing the driving sequence and them robbing a bank, and there's simplicity, of course, of let's bring in the, you know, the baby in the bank. And I love the fact you brought this up, Daniel, where we have them, this motif of like, you know, count halfway or count to there, and then I'll come back and double check. And it actually pays off where they actually double back, and the guy's like, fuck, they're actually coming back.
Bull crap. It stands up, and then they're like wheeling down the road, still yelling. That's the funny part too. They're still like bellying at full blown.
And also, and correct me if I'm wrong, they had to have, like, on that shot where they're driving behind the baby, that had to be in reverse, correct?
There was no way that I was like, physics wise, there's no way they stopped that fast if they were going as fast as they portrayed it.
Sure.
Yeah, there's some sort of effect that makes it. Yeah, maybe it's in reverse.
Also, they just wouldn't do that with a live baby.
That's what I'm wondering. I'm sure it's in reverse. Yeah, but no,
it does have a weird look to it in that final cut.
I think it's just reverse. I think that's gotta be, or at least they probably who knows.
But we know another thing too, that just the absurdity of the movie and the comic and like kind of the darkness of it too is, I mean, he puts the baby on top of the roof. And so but
I love that. It's that. I mean, again, that feels like the classic, like, you know, you just set something on the roof of the car and drive away. And I feel like setting a baby on top of the roof and drive. I mean, that's been done. I feel like I've seen it done. I mean, it may not have been done before this movie. I'm not sure, but like, I feel like it's just kind of that. Again, it's because they're also setting them up as like they're falling in love with this child, and by the end of it, they're planning to just keep him instead of getting the reward.
But what's important about it is the implication that this baby did fall off the roof.
Right. Yeah.
But landed perfectly upright.
It happens twice, and it happens twice. Yeah.
And that's what.
That is exactly what happened in the room when he's trying to steal the babies. Is like one's rolling off the couch and you hear this thump and he's just sitting there perfectly. So it's kind of these babies are like, you don't have to try babies. They're just like,
there is a moment, and this is totally off kilter here, but when Nicolas Cage is getting the babies in the crib, he like pushes one of the babies down.
I noticed that for the first time I saw that.
It made me cringe.
Pushes it down. Yeah.
I was kind of like, oh, Nicolas, like I was kind of like, dang, you know, I don't know. It kind of made me like feel weird for a second, but but anyway, no. So we know that the guy, they're screaming right here. Actually, they're screaming, they're punching the roofs and everything, and then of course we get the great reveal that the Ed and High pick up the baby. So and
then they go rob the bank, and it's just this great robbing the bank in a small town with these simple people inside. You know, I like the whole freeze on the ground, and then they don't know what to do.
And that has been in movies since. I've seen that in movies since. But again, I mean, I think a lot of this does go back to Raising Arizona and how many of these, even like the backyard chase, I'm not saying Raising Arizona was the first movie to do it, but certainly you feel like a lot of the ones since grew out of this,
I was trying to place, when did Ferris Bueller come out? Like, this is 87, so Ferris Bueller is probably 85, 84.
Right.
But anyway, I was thinking the same thing, like, oh, we got that. Yeah, there's a lot of things in here that definitely I didn't realize that could have been paying homage to. So
and I feel like I was definitely like that. That it's like I've seen these things before, but I don't think I've seen these things in an earlier movie before. You know what I mean?
And and then seeing them done this way, right? I mean, just because you might have a certain concept done, but shot the way the Coens do it, with all the great angles, and visuals that we get.
And I know to me there was even like some Wes Anderson-ness of that, of like the repeated lines, that for comedic effect from different characters, and just. Again, it's like I'm seeing things that I feel like I've seen in absurd material, other absurd material. But again, it's like I don't think I've ever seen it in the 80s necessarily, or something, or like this style of absurd. It's not like Blazing Saddles. It's this this kind of acceptedness of this absurd world and these absurd characters in it. So I mean, I think that brings us to the battle,
the final battle.
They're showing up. Which again, it's kind of this thing of like, we don't know how he found them, but we don't question it because he's this, as he says, he's a criminal to hunt criminals.
Well, actually, we do know how he found them, although there still is a little bit of magic, which is that he does end up at, I don't know if we know how he got there, but he does end up at the trailer, and he walks through all the garbage and almost magically finds the cutout of the bank.
Yeah.
He sort of uncovers it.
He's like, this
so,
must be the one piece of key information in this destroyed room.
But that's what leads him to the bank, right? And that's where everything's happening, because High grabs the baby around the bank, and then all those events are happening around the bank.
Yes. And then I love, again, the whole like them slipping the bottle of ink into the money, and then the whole explode, and they start yelling again with the explosion.
Right.
You know what I mean? But then I think I love the moment where like when once High and Ed catch up with him, like where's the baby, whatever, and they're driving. We're like, no, we want to come. We care about him too. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you're like, I kind of believe them. I don't think you should trust them, because obviously they're untrustworthy. But I genuinely believe they like the baby and want it to be okay. You know.
Yeah, no, you're right. And this brings us to the final battle here between Leonard and High. And of course, I loved it, especially with the outcome. I thought it was just so zany, and I mean, pulling the pins on the grenade and him exploding like that. I laughed out loud just because it's just crazy. And and the thing is, and with all this shit that's happened beforehand, they've earned that moment. Like if that happened the first 10 minutes, you might have been like, what? But because of all the things, the chase, the dogs, you know, all the Huggies, these two doofus bank robbers, all this stuff leading up to that moment, and it totally pays off, and it works in a fun and also it takes it to like a really weird type of genre, a different type of genre for a second, and I think it totally works.
Yeah, and we've got the stuff with Ed in there too, and Ed's lack of fear of Leonard, and she just marches right up to the bike and grabs the baby and manages to run off with the baby, before, and then the fight is then between Leonard and High, and sort of ends as you said.
But there's also some great filmmaking, and I say filmmaking, like I get some like Sam Raimi Evil Dead kind of like stylistic things here with like, I would really like to know how they did some of these shots, especially for the time period, because this is like creeping up around the time where we have like, you know, independent cinema kind of starting to really take hold with like Robert Rodriguez and Kevin Smith, all those guys. But here they're still doing like some crazy shots with like even mounted on the side of the bike when he's drifting and those kind of things, and it's really interesting. I'd be curious to see how they did some of this stuff for the time period.
Yeah, no, it's really visually inventive and well done. And then I think I'm looking at this shot. I think it's after Leonard has exploded, where the only thing left is the baby shoes, which, laying in the road, which almost makes you feel sad for Leonard in some strange way. And then we dissolve.
Sound effect. They sound like wind chimes or whatever it is.
Yeah,
it's like
right.
It's also like, are those his baby shoes? Are those the baby shoes of a baby he killed that wasn't a criminal or something?
I've always assumed they were his baby shoes, but
okay, yeah,
it just makes the whole thing weird but funny and kind of sentimental and touching all at the same time.
I kind of, for some reason, thought they might have been another babies that he had rescued baby shoes. I don't know. But no, that's
I don't know either.
I'm watching right now.
Mystery. Yeah,
his boot lands in the baby, and they hold on it for a good 15 seconds when like it crossfades into them returning the baby, and then we get this little nice scene here, but with Nathan Sr. and of course Ed and High, and it's kind of totally, especially with how they've painted Nathan Sr. It kind of took me by surprise. What I think you alluded to earlier, Daniel. And it has this really kind of sweet, like, oh no, you guys just need to give it time and you'll work out. And yeah, you can even hang out with my kid for a little bit longer. And I'm going to go back downstairs after my kid's been missing for X amount of time.
The same way you came in.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah.
Well, and but he is believable, and honestly, I think part of that character has been set up in earlier scenes. I mean, we actually see Nathan Arizona a little bit more than it seems, because we have the whole thing where he's interacting with the police and the FBI, and he sent his wife off with the other kids, and then presumably they're still gone, by the way, so there's no threat to any of the other babies when when Hai and Ed are there. And then I've also had the scene with Leonard where he hasn't been afraid of Leonard, and he, he seems like he could be that sort of rich white capitalist guy who, might actually pay Leonard, but he's just like, he knows Leonard's a bad guy and he wants nothing to do with him. So we do get subtle things that are sort of telling us things about Nathan that I think help set up the ending, that when he does turn out to be, he's still gruff, but he's nice about it. Make it believable, and we've seen him be decent in other places, and then, when they talk about getting divorced, he's like, if Mrs. Arizona left me, I don't know what I would do, and you see in that moment sort of this sense of true love for his wife, even with all of his, grousing and grumbling and, whatever.
Well, it's also the actor too. He's been in something else that I've seen 100 times. I think it might be City Slickers 1 or 2 or something that he's in, but he has a voice also that has this like calmness to him that makes you kind of like believe anything he kind of says, like he's telling the truth kind of thing. And one thing on a meta level for our sake that I want to point out, you just kind of brought this up, Bruce. In this movie, the cops are kind of painted as dumbasses, right? Because they're literally feet on the couch or on the table, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Our last movie we did was Bourne Identity. And as the government is trying to kill Jason Bourne, Die Hard has all these dumbass cops in it again, right? And then we have Atomic Blonde, which you can always say there's government in that are doing shady shit in that one, of course. There's different sides. And then you even go back to the Dark Knight Rises and Dark Knight and Batman Begins, and we start talking more about class systems and government and cops. And anyway, there's a trend here happening, I see. I say all that to say that.
I definitely feel like there was like, even, yes, we're like in this absurd world. So to like, we're not supposed to take it completely seriously. But there is like a level of like, you feel like the incompetency of like the systems that is being displayed is a little more like commentary than it is just the world. You know what I mean? Like it definitely feels like there's some social commentary mixed in with like just how they're portraying these, this world and all that. Yeah, I agree.
I just don't think writers like the government or officials or anything, but based on our research.
Well, at least the U.S. government, not even police, but the U.S. government is like the one group that isn't really going to say anything bad to you, right? I mean, in terms of like, we can't portray China bad because we got to sell in the Chinese market or this or that or whatever, It's. Yes. We had Muslims being bad for a long time, and then kind of saw that's not the coolest thing to do either, and so but the government's always a safe bet, when you need a bad guy.
No, it totally makes sense. And this all obviously, for me, leads up to the moment where it's all building to this other dream sequence, right? And I mean, I might be skipping ahead a little bit, but
let's go into the fantasy sort of his imagining of a possible future.
And this is go back to what you were kind of asking about earlier, Daniel. And to me, I fully believe that this is, and again, part of it's the optimist in me, but that this is what actually happens. And the big reason behind that is because I take that dream, even though it's a dream, I feel like he manifested that from this moment in his mind, or at least he had some type of premonition or something. And so I fully suspect, because of how that played out, and we saw that realization that this will also happen in the future as well, that this realization will also stem from this dream he's having. So I think that is what's going to happen. I think that is the ending to the overall story for them. Because again, I'm an optimist, and no, that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of that thing of, I don't know. I almost don't necessarily believe it will happen, because I think because of just the self-sabotaging decisions we've seen them make up to this point. And I do like kind of going back to that idea of like, will they, has they learned their lesson? Are they different? Are they going to be different people? I don't think so. I think in the end, they're just going to keep kind of being the same people, or at least the film hasn't convinced me otherwise. Even so much so as like them having practically no consequences to what they've done, or really none other than just going through the hardship, I guess, of the experience of it. Yeah, I definitely feel like it's more of just the fantasy than anything else. And I guess, the one thing that makes me, I guess, question that is the whole idea of, is Smalls coming from High's kind of mystical imagination or something, or is this really the story of a man that dreams things and they come true? You know what I mean? Is that the actual underlying story of Raising Arizona? But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I kind of,
Well, this goes back to my taxi driver argument that we had in class a couple of years ago. And I too, again, optimist, I thought that was actually happening in Taxi Driver, even though the evidence says stronger there than this case. The evidence says that he's probably not in that cab at the end, based on the previous scene. But I do think that in both cases, they at least made a choice at the end, or at least acknowledged that they're making a choice, or that something here is not right. And by acknowledging that, then, in Taxi Driver's case, he's making a choice to save somebody, which seems heroic versus what he was planning. In this, they're Ed and High are acknowledging their misgivings, right? And I think that acknowledgement and the whole movie is them trying really hard to do the right thing, even against their better nature, right? Or even their true nature. And I think that trying, to me, again, is the optimist in me. I think it is totally going to happen. Half class full.
Yeah. First of all, I'll say I think it's a brilliant ending because of the way I think that they sort of have their cake and eat it too, right? That is, they don't say this is what happened, and so they can't be accused of, giving us an overly sentimental or happy ending, because it's what High imagines could happen, right? Or dreams will happen. So first of all, I think it was super clever of the Coens to sort of put it that way, to frame it within what High wants versus what the Coens are saying actually happens. Now, so then that brings up the question of, will it happen or not? And I think there is an argument kind of along the argument that Donovan makes. Not even so much, Daniel was saying, does he have dreams and they come true? I think it's less about that and more about where High is mentally and emotionally, right? At the end of Act 1, he's kidnapped a baby and he goes to bed fearing the darkness that's coming, fearing the darkness in himself. And sure enough, it happens, right? So maybe you can just say he's prescient about the future. He has a sense of what is going to happen to him and Ed based on the actions that they have taken, right? And so I think maybe the movie invites you to think the same thing here, right? Which is that rather than being focused on the negative, rather than being focused on the bad side of himself, he and Ed did the right thing. They returned the baby, right? And they didn't have to do that, but they did it because they realized they had made a mistake and they wanted to do the right thing. And High even, basically when Arizona comes in, he's like, it was all me. He's willing to sacrifice himself and go back to jail to protect Ed. And so he has tapped into the better side of himself, right? And so maybe in having this fantasy and thinking about the future and believing it's possible, he understands that he and Ed have been changed by the experience and that they can live the better side of themselves. Whether this will literally happen, I'm not going to say it will. The fact that they still manage to have children when she can't have children, of course, that could still happen. But I think it gives us a sense that High sees the good and the possible growing out of that rather than the bad and the negative. And so I think that gives us hope for an optimistic future for them. We have to remember too that, they've said they're getting divorced. Nathan has said, well, sleep on it. And now they're sleeping on it. That is, as far as we know, they're still planning on getting divorced, right? I mean, and so let alone all of the rest of it. But I do think it gives us a hopeful possibility.
Now, I will say this. Well, I don't think they're necessarily going to change who they are or how they act. I don't necessarily see that as being like, I kind of expect them to keep on like being able to get out of it in ridiculous ways. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I don't actually see that as like a negative ending. I just kind of see that as par for the course of the film. I'm just expecting them to keep making decisions like this, but then through a series of hijinks and like ridiculous effects of cause and effect, they're just going to get out of it without consequences again.
You're just sticking with the world until the end.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. That's what makes sense to me. So
yeah, I see that. And again, I think it just boils down to my nature of hoping for the best, or at least planning for the best. And I that's just, even again, Taxi Driver, I think the evidence is overwhelming that he's not really in that taxi cab at the end, but I'm choosing in that scenario to have this ending that was presented to me. And in this case, again, I think the big thing for me is not only the conversation. He even mentions like he had the best sleep of his or life, whatever, that night or whatever. I think there's some line like that he kind of says right at the beginning of the monologue, and it just kind of tells me his conscience is clear in a way, and that he's actually, he can, think about something other than the bad in him or the bad that can come of him. And again, the big tip for me is that his first dream came true, so I assume the second one will as well. His first dream came true, and he didn't want it to come true, I assume. So if his second dream, if the odds are in his favor for this one to actually happen, if he tries, that's why I'm kind of looking at it.
Yeah. Just to kind of bring us into the wrap up and going back to me suggesting Raising Arizona, I mean, you could just say this is a slapstick movie, and then you could compare it to movies like Dumb and Dumber or something. But I think we've proven over this discussion and how we're debating the ending that even with it being a slapstick movie and even being it cartoonish and kind of simple, like Daniel said, there's a whole lot going on in this movie. And you probably wouldn't, you'd expect that from the Coen brothers, but yeah, for a comedy, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of obviously just great comic stuff, but there's a lot of great visual stuff, and it's so cleverly made. But yeah, there are some really interesting themes, and there's some things to debate, and there's some things that make you question what's going on with the characters and the reality of the situations in terms of these dreams and stuff like that. So
Bruce,
it's slightly
Daniel, real quick, Bruce, I invite you on this podcast, and you start diminishing Dumb and Dumber right in front of my eyes. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, I love Dumb and Dumber. I'm just saying it's no Raising Arizona.
I will say, to your point, there is this level of like, it's slightly a highbrow comedy disguised as a lowbrow comedy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is pretty simple and kind of, slapstickish, cartoonish. But yeah, it is. You start digging, and you're like, oh, okay, well, there was a lot more thought put behind these ideas than you would maybe normally see, with the synopsis that you read for this film.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, and so well constructed, right? I mean, constructed with artistry, right? I mean, you can have two chairs that are equally great to sit in, and one of them you can just admire for how well it was put together, and another one's just, a factory churned out plastic chair, right? I mean,
you want to sit in, you know what I mean?
That was a beautiful little thing right there, Bruce. I like the chair.
Yeah, thanks.
No, you're right. I mean, I'm really glad I watched it. It's what I, have been wanting to watch it for a long time. And after I posted, of course, I had to let everybody know that I was watching Raising Arizona.
Oh, shit.
And everybody
something until I saw how much people were writing you about not even seeing it. I was like, oof.
Yeah, they were really hitting me. Like, what are you? What have you been doing your whole life? That's kind of thing.
Like, for the first time in a while.
Yeah, exactly. Eric White was like, how many times? When was the last time you saw it? And I was like, never. But, so anyway, it was. I'm glad we watched it. I think it's a great movie to talk about, and it makes me. There's a few Coen Brothers films that have escaped me. I've seen Hudsucker Proxy. I've seen, of course, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, Barton Fink. I've seen No Brother Where Art Thou. I have not seen their last. I saw the ballad one that was on Netflix, but I haven't seen the one with George Clooney. But it makes me want to kind of go back and kind of start revisiting some. I've seen, of course, Big Lebowski, but I kind of want to hit them all. What, Daniel?
Which George Clooney one? Is it more recent?
Yeah, it's like last 5-6 years.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. It's set in the 50s, I think, in Hollywood, and Scarlett Johansson is in it.
Yeah.
It's got, I think, Channing Tatum in it. I could be wrong.
No, it's got a
I haven't
cast. It's a big cast.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one either. I need to catch up with that one.
Yeah,
like you had almost all of them, but there are maybe 3 to 4 that have fallen through the cracks for me.
That one isn't as funny, maybe, to me, or it's not as good as some. It's not my favorite Coen Brothers, but it definitely is fun if you like old Hollywood and like a lot of like kind of inside baseball kind of jokes. If you will. And then it does have some hilariously quotable moments and like some really and some really good performances.
Yeah. Oh, of course, Fargo. I've seen that, and I guess the one that I haven't seen is it's called Hell Caesar, by the way. But the one I haven't seen, I really want to see. I've seen scenes of is Inside Llewyn Davis. That's the one I really want to watch. I just haven't got a chance to do it yet. But I guess
that's one I need to go back to. That one I had mixed feelings about, but so many people love it so much that I kind of want to go back and revisit it and see if my mind changes.
That's what I want to do.
Sometimes, kind of like you were saying, sometimes you have an expectation that you're getting one thing, and then if you get something different, sometimes you figure it out, but sometimes you don't, and then you're just like, oh, I don't know what that was, and then you kind of have to go back and reassess it, now that you know what you're supposed to be getting. So
there was, and this is off topic, but Bruce, when we were on Die Hard, there was a movie you suggested that I should watch, and I cannot remember the name of the movie. I'm sure I'm putting you on the spot for 6 months ago, but
I don't remember.
I've listened to that podcast quite a bit.
Wish there was some sort of record. It was like,
hey,
I was going to say, is it in the podcast?
It's in the podcast.
Some sort of like network of interconnected.
We don't have anyone to transcribe our episodes, so
it's like, I don't know, like a spider web or something.
Right. Yeah.
Well, actually, Zoom transcribes them now, so
there you
can
go.
Publish transcriptions with.
I guess if you do want to find out what movie that is, you can always go to 2for1studios.com or check out the channel youtube.com/2for1studios. Find out all your 2for1 content. Daniel, how can our listeners write into us?
Listeners, you can write into us at bit.ly/2for1mail, just like Joel did recently. And just like, shout out to Prentice Dupins for giving us a nice little message about our episode with Flash writer Jess Carson, which if you haven't seen that yet, it's a great episode, little inside baseball and writing. Writers
have to watch that one. Yeah.
It's a good one.
It's a great. Jess, really great. She was a great guest. Gave us lots of fun little stories and such. So, cool. Write in bit.ly/2for1mail. There's more than one person using it now.
That's an uptick. That's a plus. And again, we always recommend that you guys consume the content on the channel. Hit that subscribe button. Boost that up with us. And if you can't, we're on all podcast services: Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, all the major ones. So we'd love to have you guys check us out and hear more of the previous movies we've done with Bruce. And of course, if you want to learn more about Bruce's process and some of the other films he's done in the past, you can always check him out at thehutchfiles.com. Is that right, Bruce?
Yes, that's right. Although I've slacked the last 6 months because the world is just a crazy place right now. But a lot of stuff on there. So
of content.
I do actually have a lot of backlog of content because I've done breakdowns of all the movies we've done, but I haven't posted the last few, so I need to get back to that and get some more stuff up there. So absolutely. No,
we need to figure out our next movie because I do love doing these, and they should be more. I know we're fixing to hit school time and X, Y, and Z, but I think that we need to kind of keep it going because I love doing it, and I think it's probably the best content we produce actually. So on the channel.
Well, that's an honor to hear that. But actually in some ways it's easier for me to do it during school where I'm really in the flow of working. So we should probably be able to get on a regular schedule for a while, which would be great.
That'd be awesome. Well, guys, I really appreciate it. And of course, we'll be back soon, listeners. This is episode, I think, I hate to do this, but episode 85. So we're on the road to 100. So we're getting closer and closer week by week. We have some exciting guests coming on in the next couple of weeks, one being Scott Eggleston, who recently just finished on Bad Bones feature film. He's going to talk about that process. Bruce, I do want to ask you real quick, you just shot a feature film, correct?
I did. It's called
Yeah.
Mountain Flowers. It was a 12-day shoot in the beginning of June. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
When-
If you ever want to do something on that, I'm happy to
I
talk
would love
about
to.
my process on that too. So.
I would love to sit down and talk to you about it. Is there, real quick, can you, is there any type of, I would like to have the movie at least cut and finished, a fine cut by?
My goal for absolutely being done with it is the end of next summer. I'm about 3/4 of the way through a rough cut right now, but as you mentioned, school is coming up quickly, and school does put a dent in my in my movie making outside of teaching. So the post will slow down immensely in fall and spring, and I'll be working on it, but I'll have to, it won't be till next May where I'll be able to fire it up and kind of get over the line is my hope. So yeah.
That's awesome.
So
I was
about-
following
about a
you
year.
guys on Instagram, so I was, trying to,
Yeah.
see what was going on. And so I'm excited to see the movie A, and then B, hear about the process and that kind of stuff. That's a great idea, Bruce. We're going to definitely have you on here pretty soon about that.
Cool.
Guys, we did it. Episode 85 in the books.
Yeah.
As long as Daniel doesn't delete it before it airs. And
No, you did that.
It is recording
No.
to the cloud, so
the
hopefully.
SSD, and you were moving shit around with your thesis at the time, trying to make a hard drive that I could color on for your thesis. You're
You
not
guys can
responding,
continue
that's not right.
continue the debate afterwards. Yeah.
anyway, my name is Donovan Thompson,
I'm Danny Wingfield.
And I'm Bruce Hutchinson.
and we have spoken.